In this video, we have a very special guest joining us today. We're going to talk about Bob Chapek in relation to the parks. We're going to talk about some D+. We have a ton of stuff to talk about today. Up next. Hey everybody, welcome aboard to another episode of Orange Grove 55, where today we are going to be talking about Bob Chapek in relation to the parks. We're going to talk about D+ and their subscriber growth last quarter. We're going to talk about some, IP, Marvel, Star Wars. We got a lot to discuss today, but before we do, I want to introduce my fantastic panel. We have a new face to the channel. He will be joining us today, Mr. Jay Sherer of the Story Geeks. Jay, it is an absolute pleasure having you on board today, sir.
It's so fun to talk to people that I listen to all the time. And you guys have some of the best intros in the business, by the way. The way you play your little clips in the beginning, fantastic stuff.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. Now, if you could let everyone know like a little bit about your background, what you do on YouTube, where they can find you.
Yeah, for sure.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, so I have a channel and a podcast called The Story Geeks, and we generally dig as deep as we can into a lot of times geek stories, but I've branched out of geek stories too. I've been watching Tokyo Vice on HBO Max. I've been watching Winning Time on HBO Max, but a lot of times if you like Disney stuff, we're almost always talking about Disney stuff, especially Marvel and Star Wars. That comes up all the time, and we dig as deep as we can into it to really understand, like, what are these things about? Are the storytellers doing a good job? Where could they have done better? Where did they already hit it out of the park? That's generally what we're doing. And you can follow me, Jay Sherer on Twitter, or Storytelling HSW on Twitter. I manage both those accounts, and you can come check out, what we're up to over there.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for joining us today. And everyone at home watching, I will be linking all of the all of Jay's, social media down below in the description. His YouTube channel and everything. Is definitely check him out and give him a subscribe. He makes fantastic content. And then we have producer Dre over here, host of Freshly Squeezed. Vash Guy, how you doing today, sir?
Doing pretty good. When you talked about Jay coming on the show, I was like, oh man, I got to be there. And so I am honored and humbled to be part of this group. Really excited to talk about the topics as well. So I can't wait. If you want to find me, well, you can do so at Vash Sky. It's the best way to interact with me if you want to do that. For all the, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy said, robust discussion, right? And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be the channel you're watching right now, an Orange Grove 45 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice and news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. And we'll go ahead and get we'll get Jay in the park as well. How about that? There you go.
There you go. There we go. We're all in. All right. So the first topic of today, I really wanted to kind of dive into like this whole idea of Bob Chapek in relation to the Disney parks. There's been a lot of talk about that. Obviously, I mean, he ran the parks from, I believe it was like 2015 up until 2020 when he became the CEO. Now he's a CEO. He has a big part in that overall theme park situation, obviously, as a CEO. So he's left a huge mark, I think, on these parks. And I want to kind of break down like what exactly, where is he at? I mean, he gets a lot of hate, but is it overblown? Is it justified? So we're going to kind of break that down. But Jay, I'm going to start with you today. In terms of Bob Chapek in relation to the Disney parks, like where are you at with him? Like how do you feel? Because there's a lot of anger out there in the community about Chapek, but like from your perspective, is that overblown? Is it underblown? Is it justified? Where are you kind of at?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you guys do a really great job and a fair job of covering Chapek. So thanks for having me on to discuss it. A little bit of background on me, because I just talked about a lot of storytelling stuff that I do, but I was a pass holder for 12 plus years prior to the pandemic. Southern California resident. I lived 7 miles from Disneyland before I moved out of state during the pandemic. And longtime Disney fan. And I also have an MBA, so I care about the business side. And one of the things I've always loved about Disney was the business side of how they handle their properties and how they bring their creativity into the parks from a creativity perspective and a design perspective. Fantastic stuff. So has Chapek been good for the parks in this regard? How has he done? Here's my overarching view. And I would love to get your guys' take on this too. I feel like Chapek's biggest problem from a customer perspective is that he is not an in front of the camera, in front of people guy. Like he's not, and we've always had that with the parks, right? We've always had a guy who, now you guys did a really good job of covering how like few times Iger actually showed up in the parks, you know, right? Like, so you've talked about that before, which I think is absolutely true, but he still has that. And you guys said this too. You said he still has that wants to move in the Hollywood circles kind of vibe, right? Like Iger had that. So if you track back, I mean, Eisner wanted to be in front of the camera. Eisner was trying to do a Walt Disney impersonation, even though he was not quite ever getting there. Yeah. But Walt Disney, I think we tend to view things as Uncle Walt in the parks, creating an experience for us that we just feel like is super magical, and we associate ourselves to him. They put pictures of him, walk into Carthay Circle, and you see all the pictures of Walt, and you go, this is so cool. And then we get a guy who comes in and he's going, look, I'm the efficiency guy. I'm the behind the scenes guy. I try to run things. That's my deal. Right. And we expect him to be good in front of people. And I think that that's a little bit unfair. Right. However, if I were to criticize him, what I would say is he needs to identify that he's not that guy, and he needs to get that guy to be his public facing person.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, hit the nail on the head, Jay. Like he should even like I've made videos like a few months ago how Chapek should sort of like own it. Like he obviously everyone knows like he's super awkward, and like when he speaks and stuff, he's really cringy and awkward. And I think Chapek, it would go a long way in regards to his likability if he owned that, right? If he got up on the D23 stage and said, "Hey, look, you know what? I suck at speaking. I am a disaster, but I'm here for you guys, and I'm trying my best." You know, kind of bring him down a little bit and have that self kind of deprecating humor. I think would go a long way in sort of kind of like, I don't know, making him a little more likable, you know, say, hey, look, you know what? I'm not as smooth as Bob Iger. I'm just not, you know, but hey, I'm out here trying my best, and this is what I do. You know, this is who I am. Instead of just trying to read the script and sort of like trying to fake it, just own it, right? Just kind of own it. And I think that would go a long way in that PR battle, you know?
Totally agree.
I think so, and like you said, Jay, very astutely, he's like the efficiency guy. Ironically, the parks aren't super efficient. We had a whole big long discussion about this covering the quarterly earnings report, which that video will be coming out soon. But that, you know, he is kind of the nuts and bolts guy. He's not really, you know, that kind of creative visionary that we've most commonly associated with Disney, like you astutely point out. And that's kind of unfortunate. I guess it's kind of the nature of that dynamic that Chapek brings, right? I mean, he came from consumer products for all those years, and then when he, you know, when he did make it over to the Disney Parks division, of course, he merged it with his old with his old division, right? And we started to see some changes coming out of that. So I would think, you know, as far as how the parks are run, I mean, I think the yield management strategies have been a little bit too aggressive. I think we can kind of rein those things in a bit. Some of those are operational realities, you know, given the market. So, you know, everybody's suffering from labor issues and stuff like that. There's not a whole, you know, a lot of strategies that you can implement to overcome those issues, right? And people can argue about that, but I think I agree with you guys. I think what needs to happen is he needs to kind of attach himself to maybe creative projects, you know, rather than just the guy in the quarterly earnings calls, you know. And I think his opportunity to do that, you know, a lot of people were like, well, you know, couldn't he done that at D23 Plus or D23? What was it?
Destination D.
Destination D. Sorry, Destination D23, right? But, you know, obviously he had a dinner to attend to. Okay, you know, whatever. And there weren't many announcements that he could have partaken in. I think for this upcoming D23 Expo, I think there's a great opportunity there to have him come out maybe with Josh Giamaro and announce some projects related to the parks. At least just get his name attached, you know, instead of being the guy that's, you know, like I said, who's the business Wall Street guy. Now, if he were to come out and say, "Hey, new Tomorrowland, and we're bringing people over back," that would, that I think that would kind of change in his direction. He can kind of build from there. But right now, what is he associated with? He's associated with cost cutting, yield management, the reservation system, Genie Plus, all of these things that are kind of controversial, especially in our sphere. And I think he needs to overcome that somehow, in my best estimation.
Well, one thing that I think that he should get credit for, which I don't see a lot of fans giving him credit for, is Cosmic Rewind. I mean, that was greenlit on his watch, when he was the parks guy, right? And then it opened while he was CEO. I mean, his fingerprints are all over that thing. And from what I understand, it was a pretty expensive attraction, 300 million plus.
Yeah, 350.
Yeah, and fans seem to love it. It's a quality attraction. I mean, I've seen all the videos. I haven't been on it personally, but I've seen all the videos. It seems like a really high quality experience. Look, and that's one of the things. That's one of the issues I have kind of with the fandom is that, like, when the bad stuff happens, it's always like, oh, it's Chapek, right? But then, like, Cosmic Rewind opens, it's fantastic. It's a high quality edition, and then suddenly his name is just left out of the conversation completely. And I think that's unfair. I think that if you're gonna have this kind of like mindset, okay, the buck stops here with this guy. This guy is kind of running the show. You gotta criticize him when things go bad, but then you also gotta kind of give him credit for when things go good. But what are your feelings on that, Jay, in terms of, like, just the perspective, with the good and the bad and all that?
Yeah, I think it's complex. I think there's a couple things going on. One thing is, we can't forget that Walt had Roy, right? Like
yeah.
Disneyland may have gone out of business. There might not be a Disney company today if Walt didn't have Roy, right? So Walt was the visionary. Walt was the public facing guy, but he had a guy crunching the numbers behind him.
Yeah.
Even Eisner had Wells, and you guys have covered that really well about, like, how when Frank Wells passed away, that's when things got rocky, because these are effectively 2-person teams operating this company. And to make matters worse, one of the things I think that's going on right now is that Disney is adapting to the marketplace in such a way that we were in the height of Disney fandom. This might be overstating it, okay? But we were in a rise in Disney fandom prior to the pandemic, meaning that look how many vloggers were in the parks. People were making their money. Their daily job was to show up in the parks and videotape stuff and to broadcast that content to more people. And what it did was, like, even I'm one of these people, right? I wanted the most expensive pass, and I wanted to show up when I wanted to show up. And that pass kept going up in price, and the demand for that pass never dropped. So we had these core local fans that said, I want everything that Disney can possibly give me. Then we enter this pandemic phase, and the whole marketplace just changes drastically. Yeah. International travel is still not very popular right now, which means that people are going to go domestic. When they go domestic, Disney parks look pretty appetizing. So part of it for me, I think, with the reaction to Chapek is that the people who were those super fans, I'll include myself in that, we're getting the worst of what Chapek is bringing in, because he's changing the dynamic of what it was for us. We didn't need a reservation. We could just go whenever we wanted to. We could just show, we bought the pass. We bought our Max Pass upgrade and didn't need to buy Genie Plus every single time we'd go, right? These are the things that Chapek implemented, these things, which I can make an argument. I mean, the next 3, 4, or 5 years will be critical, but I can make an argument that Chapek may have been the best guy to run the parks at this point in time, because if he hadn't shown that they could be super profitable, they had 2 years of giant losses with the parks completely closed down. So they've got to do something about that from a financial perspective. And I think Chapek is doing things that people like me, probably people like you guys, probably a lot of the people watching this channel, it's painful to us because we're getting things taken away. Things are costing more than they would have before, but at the same time, he's keeping the company alive and hopefully, taking the company through some. And I think you guys covered. I watched a video this morning where you guys were covering what's the stock price doing and stuff. Well, the stock price is sort of just following what the rest of the market's doing at this point. Right. It could be way worse, right? Like this is all relative. It's all relative. So right. I think it'll be hard to give Chapek a full analysis until a few years down the road. But I think you can make an argument that his biggest problem is that if he had somebody out front, like I said earlier, that was making people like us who they're taking things away from feel better, he probably would be considered more successful. That's kind of my take on it.
Oh no, 100%, Jay. A lot of this is optics.
Yes.
And you brought up you brought up a really fantastic point when you said he's kind of the perfect guy for the job right now. One of the things that stood out in the quarterly earnings from a few days ago was how like this whole Genie Plus lightning lane thing has really kind of buoyed the parks division in terms of profitability, right? In terms of the money. And that was a Chapek thing, and look, like you said, like the park, California, Disneyland Resort was shut down for like how many days, Dre? You got the exact total. 412 days. They got to recoup that somehow. I mean, it's still a business, and if they can make money through this Genie Plus program, I know a lot of fans, like you said, Jay, don't really like that. But at the end of the day, I mean, we can be inconvenienced as fans, and it can, or we can just not have a Disney at all because they can't afford to stay afloat. I don't know. I think that there's a huge aspect of it, And
to be honest, I don't disagree with that at all. I think, Jay, you brought up a great point where it's like, Chapek, I mean, we were front-ended with all of these kind of monetization practices, right? That were kind of, I mean, you kind of had to make those decisions when you did because, so many things were kind of, just either shut down or completely upended, right?
Yeah.
So I think it makes a lot of sense that you do implement those things. Usually you would have stretched it out like over like 10 years, then slowly done these things, but they kind of had to, put that in kind of a 2-year span, and that's shaking some people up. So I completely understand that. I think Chapek had a directive where it was like just monetize the parks. Any way we can monetize them, we're going to. And they were already kind of leaning in that direction, but they really kind of doubled down, and part of it, like you said, OG, part of it they had to, I mean, right. when you have to recover that much loss, right, in revenue, you're gonna have to make some tough decisions, and you're gonna have to make them quickly, and he did, unfortunately. I will say, like I said, I don't think some of these services or some of the changes implemented are necessarily a bad thing, right? I think there's a better way you can go about the reservation system, and even a better way you can go about Genie Plus to make it better for just about everybody involved. So I think the management of those systems still need to be taken into account and maybe need to be adjusted over time. But I mean, you can't criticize the guy too bad because he did get Disney out of that situation relatively unscathed. A lot of people were kind of theorizing maybe they had to part some stuff out, right? Maybe they had to separate themselves from ESPN and some of the other divisions and stuff like that, and that didn't happen. And they were able to leverage that distribution network that they've constructed for themselves quite effectively. So you got to give them credit on that, and not a lot of people do.
No, it's hard. It's hard to give credit because it's a lot of this stuff. You both touched upon it. A lot of these services like FastPass were free before, and it's hard. It's a tough it's a tough pill to swallow now to have to be like, oh, now I got to pay for it, Mm-hmm. So it's interesting times indeed. Now, Jay, have you been following? Or are you aware of like this whole Magic Key lawsuit that's going on right now?
I'm aware of it. I have not been following it closely. But it does bring up another point that I think I was pretty positive about Chapek and what I just said, but let me just say something that could be the worst thing that could happen to Disney because of Chapek. Sure. And that is, and this is a part of it, that lawsuit is a part of it. If he is trying to get a different fan base, an out-of-state fan base, let's call him.
Yeah.
And if he fails at that, or if the marketplace shifts again and he's already lost his core Disney base, that we're kind of like, man, I'm going to bail on this because it's too expensive now and it's too much and I'm not interested in it, then that could be a huge problem that he creates for himself down the road. So
100%.
again, it's hard to judge someone's legacy while they're while they're in the seat. But that's another area where it's like, yeah, people are suing. People are pretty pissed about these things.
Yeah,
I was listening to a Fresh Baked video where Fresh Baked. I think his name's David, right? David's the Fresh Baked guy. Yeah.
Dave, yep.
Dave was talking about how there's 30% adoption of Genie Plus where there used to be 80% adoption of Max Pass, right? And he was looking at those two figures. And I don't know that the actual figures are what the actual figures are, but one of the things I commented on that video was, yes, but when you're saying 30% adoption versus 80% adoption, it's all the same revenue. So in other words, like if if we were to play the math, if one person was willing to pay $1,000, that's better than 3 people willing to pay $300.
Right.
You still make the delta of 100. So and that's how Chapek thinks. When you hear Chapek on a call, when you hear Chapek breaking down business, he doesn't think like, I'm just going to make everybody happy. He's thinking like, how do I make the people that are willing to pay the happiest? That's what he's really trying to do. And so, he may destroy some of the goodwill he had in the biggest fans over the course of time. And ultimately that might be really, really terrible. So it's just hard. It's just really hard to say.
It's hard to say. Yeah. Because a lot of the locals, and I'm one of them, I'm a local and I'm guilty as hell in regards to all this stuff. Like I'll pop into the parks, I'll buy a popcorn bucket and leave.
Yeah.
All right. Disney, I mean, this is how it is, and Disney doesn't make any money on key holders that do that. I mean, really, like after the first 5 or 6 visits, even if you have the most expensive pass, after the first 5 or 6 visits, you paid for that pass, and every subsequent visit, they're kind of losing money on you, and you're now with the reservation system, you're even taking up a spot for maybe a potential for a person that might have been like out of state that might have spent a whole lot more, Exactly. So it's interesting. And you're right, Jay, like it's a balancing act because Chapek wants to maximize the per guest spending, which a lot of times alienates the locals, but then you don't want to alienate the locals too much because if you don't have them and the tourism doesn't pan out, then you got a problem. It's a tightrope. It's really, it's a tightrope. What do you have to say, Dre?
And it absolutely is. I mean, we I think the intention was even for like the Magic Key program, right, was to place people in buckets and kind of prioritize tourist and international visitation over kind of a local driven visitation, and that that got contentious real quick, as you astutely point out, Jay. I mean, that lawsuit didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, that came out of part of it was born out of the frustration with these new systems. There's also some allegations that it could be a corporate luring a corporate lawyer outfit that might be. I've heard it, but I think the fact that they wanted to make it a class action was to capitalize on that frustration, right? And that's kind of the motivation going into it. So you really got to be careful, and obviously they've adjusted since then, and as we will point out in this latest earnings call, maybe it's not working out for quite everybody, right? And you're burning that goodwill, like you said, and that could really, I mean, as you kind of allude to, if those market conditions change, which everybody's kind of predicting that they will, where's everybody going to be on the back end? Are they going to be supporting you? If gas goes up, any more than we have right now, are they going to necessarily pay the higher ticket costs, whether it comes to planes or the higher gas prices to actually get out to your location? All those things used to be driving forces. It's kind of like, hey, even in downtimes, entertainment still makes money, and usually that's true. But if people have a visceral reaction to you, maybe you don't make quite as much, and you're really gonna have to balance that out here, and maybe we'll see some decisions on that end, attempting to restore that goodwill. It's interesting you bring up kind of Magic Keys what is it? Max Pass and Fast Pass, right? And those kind of adoption rates. That 80% figure, a lot of that was driven by APs getting Max Pass applied just as their base ticket. Now, obviously, that's changed, but I worry about those ratios a little bit, right? And I agree with you. If you're making 1,000 from one person versus 1,000 from 3 people, probably that whale is probably the better way to go. Just the overhead alone would lend itself towards doing that. And we actually make a point on this latest video about like, hey, look, if they were to increase the price of Genie Plus and really kind of capitalize on those whales, maybe that might make it better for everybody, because the Genie Plus people get a really great service that actually works and doesn't just have everybody and their mothers going in on it, but also better for the standby because it makes that more efficient. You can lessen the ratios just because less people are on the system. So I think those kind of operational demands or kind of operational philosophies will have to change going forward, and will have the effect of endearing that goodwill and restoring it, because it's taking a beating. I'm not gonna lie, it's taking a beating.
It is. It's taking a beating. I'm not 100%. It's totally up in the air. It's totally up in the air. We'll have to kind of wait and see. Disney fans, though, and I've been part of this community for a very long time, and Disney fans are kind of notorious for being very, very loud online.
Yeah.
But then they'll just renew anyway, and let's see how those Magic Key renewals turn out in August, because will the Twitter kind of anger pan out into something kind of like tangible? Yeah. Where the numbers drop, or are people going to be like, yeah, I don't like the reservation system, but I need my Disney, I'll renew anyway. That's a thing. I don't really know. In August is when everyone's up, because that's when the Magic Key program. I think it was August, right, Dre? I believe.
Yeah, I believe August. I think late August was the launch of the Magic Key program, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see, how those numbers are. Okay, are Disney fans going to put kind of vote with their wallets, or are they just going to kind of, hey, you know what, take my money anyway, and I'll just complain on Twitter? We'll see, Yeah,
and if Chapek is following the individual yields of each guest, and if he's following all of that data, that will matter to him. Yeah. Meaning that if you really want Chapek to pay attention to your opinion, get off Twitter and go to Knott's Berry Farm. You know what I mean? Like, he'll figure it out.
Right. Oh, 100%, Jay. We've been screaming that mantra for a long time on this channel. You got to vote with your wallet. If you don't like what you see, then don't buy it. And if you like what you see, then buy into it, support it, but especially now more than ever, Chapek is such a data guy. He's such a data guy. He's looking at those spreadsheets, man. And if it's kicking butt on those spreadsheets, you're going to get more of it. So Magic Key holders, if you're not happy, well, maybe don't renew, and that might send a message, it's very, very important. And that's why Disney also, I've gotten quite a few of these surveys from the resort. When I visit, like a day later, I'll get a resort. Like a day later, I'll get like a resort survey. Very important to fill those out as well. That's part of the data, fill it out honestly and really let Disney know how you're feeling. That's how they gauge everything and sort of decide where they're going to go with stuff. It's very, very important. A lot of fans skip over that stuff. They get that survey and they ignore it. No. You got to fill it out. You got to.
Yeah, and really, I think the way that those surveys work, and I have a fun story for you guys after this too. But the way those surveys tend to work is that they're capturing your opinion, and then guess what? They're also capturing your behavior. Right. So the opinion guides what they might do in the future. But if your behavior doesn't match your opinion, they're going to be like, yeah, I know they don't like the fact that we just increased the prices by $5 on all ice cream cones, but they still bought one. You know what I mean? Like, so it's one of those things where they're trying to gauge those two things and try to have the most optimized experience. But I remember back when I was in my MBA program, there was a guy, this is in the early 2000s. Well, it's maybe closer to 2010, 2008, something like that. Mm-hmm. This guy gave a presentation. He had worked at Disney, and he was showing us how Disney measured guest behavior all the way back then. And it was fascinating because they knew, they could predict, this is how many people are in the park on any given day, predict it out.
Yeah.
If this ride goes down, these 3 rides will pick up the extra weight. Because this ride goes down, these rides are going to get extra attention thrown at them.
100%.
That was 12 years ago, almost 15 years ago.
Wow.
Imagine the kind of data with all the phone data that they have now. You're walking around finding Disney Plus. They know what you're doing. So you can't escape the fact that like you can go on Twitter and complain as much as you want to, but they know what you really did. They know.
Oh yeah.
So, and
it gets much more sophisticated and granular than that. You know, I like to talk about the story where it's like, you know, back in the days of FastPass, you know, if they had attractions that were dispensing FastPasses along the parade route, you know, they would, you know, systematically try to have those return times, kind of not come at a time when that parade was actually in progress, right? As opposed to the farther away attractions, they would try to have those, you know, return times disproportionately affect those attractions while parades were going, so to stretch you out. So, I mean, they do a lot of that kind of, I guess you would call it social engineering, a lot. And yeah, I mean, you know, to OG's point, I mean, surveys, absolutely, they're looking at that, and they're not only looking at that, but they're using it to model, you know, with the computer algorithms, what their behavior is going to do going forward. I think Chapek actually talked about that on the quarterly earnings call. So it's like, you know, these things matter, folks. I mean, you have to participate.
You got to. You vote with your wallet. You do the surveys. That's the best way to affect change. You know, we all love Disney. You know, we all love Disney. We all want to go and have a good time. And the best way to make the best experience for you and your family is to really kind of partake in that voting with your wallet and those surveys, because that'll really let Disney know where we're at. You know, are we happy? Are we not happy? You know, all that stuff. It's so vital. It's so vital. And I feel like a lot of fans kind of skip over that. They're like, nah, I'll just tweet about it. Disney doesn't really care about your tweets. They care about your money, and they care about those surveys. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now, speaking of the parks, we're gonna kind of pivot into some pretty good news. I mean, I've been pretty bullish on this next one. The red car trolley is returning to California Adventure. There's been a lot of kind of talk about, hey, is this thing even going to come back? You know, it's expensive. I think like 2 cast members operating each trolley. I'm sure the capacity isn't like the greatest. It doesn't really make any money. You know, like it's not monetized. It's not like a bar or something like that. Mm-hmm. I was worried for a long time. I was like, I don't know. I hope this comes back. I really do, because I do feel it adds a lot of kinetic energy to California Adventure, and I have a soft spot for California Adventure. It's like I'm rooting for it because like the underdog story. You know, I want this little park to do well. I was really happy when Disney officially announced it is returning. I don't believe they gave an official date, but it is returning. The Newsboys show, though, which was phenomenal, will unfortunately not be part of that reopening. That has been canceled. But Jay, I want to go to you first. Like, what are your thoughts on the red car trolley returning? Overall feelings on how it like impacts the park? Where are you at with this?
Yeah, so it sounds like you and I are going to be very similar pages on this one too, because I mean, I remember I was there when California Adventure opened, right? Like, I've been around since that time, and it had some issues with it. It felt a lot more like, and I'm sure you guys have covered this in depth, but it felt a lot more like an amusement park as opposed to a theme park in many regards. And I think one of the things that when Iger announced that it was going to be Buena Vista Street, and then they rethemed that whole section, what he did was he added that kind of perfect Disney touch to a park that really needed that at the time. And the red car trolley is one of the only things that I can think of besides the cast members who are playing characters. It's one of the only things that has the Disneyland feel, where you walk into Disneyland and you see the vehicles going around the circle, and you see, you know, I you know, it's been a while since I've been to Disneyland, but you have the horse-drawn carriage coming down the street, right? Yeah. So like, I think that the red car trolley is one of the things for California Adventure, one of the only things for California Adventure that gives that same vibe. Yeah. I do think that they have a little bit of an issue in that it doesn't it kind of still go out towards Guardians, right? Like, so that's a little bit maybe they'll change the track. I don't know that it doesn't see. It seems like if it goes into the Marvel area, that's maybe a little bit off theme. But other than that, I think the Car Trolley is just so cool. I mean, when you see the thing coming down Hollywood Boulevard or Sunset Boulevard or whatever they call it there, is it Hollywood or Sunset? You guys would know.
Hollywood, right?
It's Hollywood. Yeah, it's
Hollywood.
Hollywood. Hollywood Boulevard. Yeah.
Okay. And as it comes down that street, it's like, this is cool, man. Like, this is just great theming. It's like perfect for this whole zone. So I'm excited. Anytime they bring something back, bummer about the Newsies show. Like, you know, you hate to hear that. But I think it's great. The more you get back to that kind of stuff, the better.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. What do you think, Dre?
I'll add some clarity to that point about the Avengers and Marvel as well. From what I understand, it will go pretty much the new route is going to be, from what we've heard, going to go just as far as the animation building, and then it's going to go ahead and head back. They actually spent a considerable amount of money to make a new charging station for the Red Car Trolley in Buena Vista Street itself. That was one of the last few projects that was wrapping up right before everything shut down and everything like that. But it was all in an effort to make it so that it never interacts with Avengers Campus during the day. That was the kind of mindset. So even though the tracks are out there, because obviously the storage location for those vehicles is past that location, during the day while on stage, as we like to say at Disney, it'll never actually make an appearance. So that is good. And look, I agree with you. I know you're kind of story minded. Sunshine Plaza previously to Buena Vista Street didn't have really a time or place, right? It wasn't quite of a setting. It's kind of the introductory lanes in these parks are usually referred to by executives as retail corridors. That's kind of the mindset, right? And that's exactly what it was. But to actually create a new time and place and setting to set you up, that's following, Walt Disney, Main Street, and that kind of thing. And it brought it more in line with that. And I think, like you said, I mean, there's not really a lot of other things that make that story come alive other than the Red Car Trolley. And to get it back, I mean, it is really, really cool. I've seen a lot of people, they go to like Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom's Main Street, right? And you can kind of see a little bit of that retail corridor philosophy taking place. And one of those is that they don't really have Main Street vehicles. It's kind of interesting. Watch a vlogger go to Main Street this time for the first time. They always get impressed by how many Main Street vehicles we actually have going up and down the boulevard there. It definitely makes an impression. A lot of it's going to be subconscious for the, overwhelming amount of guests, but they do take it in. It does do its job in recreating that story. And cementing that in people's minds. So this is a big deal. This is not just this little kind of what is it, simple operation, right? Where it's like two cast members and it doesn't have a lot of capacity or whatever, and operational just get in the way. You can make the argument, right? It's more about taking Disney California Adventure up a notch. Right. And I think it accomplishes that. So this is it's very symbolic, I think.
It is. And the great thing about Buena Vista Street as a whole is that it really kind of bookends Main Street kind of perfectly. It was kind of brilliant in that you go to Main Street and you're kind of experiencing Walt Disney's like boyhood town of Marceline, Missouri, Then you go across the way and you go to DCA, and this is like his Walt Disney in his early 20s coming to Los Angeles. It's just such a perfect kind of like George Lucas says, it's poetry, it rhymes. It very much is that, like, those bookends. I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, I will say this a little bit about the whole, the trolley going into Avengers Campus. I'm glad to hear that they're going to stop in Hollywood Boulevard and go back. That's great. I wouldn't mind, though, if it did go into Avengers Campus, just because I feel like even at Disneyland, you see kind of like these juxtapositions of like contradicting themes all the time. I mean, we have the Swiss Alps, the Matterhorn, with a monorail circling around it. I mean, it's weird. I mean, it's really, really weird. But it works because, it's Disneyland and we're just kind of used to it. I do think it could work in Avengers Campus, especially since, the Avengers sort of take place in our real world. Trolley isn't completely out of the realm of possibility to see in that world that the Avengers live in, which is our world, really. I wouldn't mind it. But with that said, I am glad, though, that they aren't going to make regular routes through it. If they can avoid it and just go down Hollywood, that's preferable, I think. But if they did stop at Vendors Campus, I'm not too upset. I am glad, though. There were rumors a few years ago that they were going to actually transform the trolley into a web trolley. The engineering brigade, that web slingers, basically. There was that rumor for a long time, and that made me really nervous. I'm glad they didn't go down that route. I think that would have been a disaster. That would have been cringy. Yeah.
Well, and harkening back to our conversation about Chapek, bringing back the red car trolley is not a good financial decision. I'm sure it costs more money than it does move people, right? Like it's just so I think that there you go. There's an example of Chapek probably not having a direct line of thought in it, but he didn't cancel it. He didn't strike it off the balance sheet or the income statement. He let it go. So yeah, there you go.
No, 100%, Jay, and that's a great point, and that's a great point. You got to give that credit where it's due, because it would have been very easy for a guy like Chapek to be like, hey, you know what, tomorrow, don't bring it back. The capacity isn't the greatest. It's expensive to run. We'll keep it mothballed. Or we'll park it and make it a bar, the red bar trolley.
Which I would go to, by the way. You'd see me there.
Me too, man. Me too. I would actually go to that. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that happening, and they didn't go down that route. And even to Chapek's credit, even with the Epcot stuff, as much as a lot of fans kind of complain about the Epcot stuff, and there's a lot to complain about, believe me. But they don't really have to pander to the Epcot purists. A lot of the aesthetics and all that they're doing with the Epcot remodel is very much like a love letter to those Epcot diehard fans, right? They don't really have to do that. I mean, they could just go all in on the IP and say, screw it, and they're not. They're kind of trying to balance it. Yeah, we're getting Moana, we're getting the IP, but hey, look, we're going to get the old school, I don't know what they call that, the glass kind of spire.
The triangular, kind of a look up on, fountain. Yeah, in the entrance of Epcot, yeah.
And it has a name, official name, but you guys know what I'm talking about. They're trying to at least appeal to those old school Epcot fans while also appealing to the normies with the Moana stuff and the IP stuff. And you got to give them credit for that too. I mean, look, they didn't have to do that. They can just go all in on the IP. The general public will eat that up like crazy. They don't really have to pander to this niche market of these purists, and they still do it, which I don't know. You got to give them credit for that, in my opinion.
Yeah. And to Jay's point about writing that off the balance sheet, we saw a lot of that during the Pro First era. I mean, I saw a lot of that where it was just like, what, it only does that amount of capacity. Let's go ahead and strike that off the ledger. Strike this, strike that. And I was kind of worried when this kind of reimagining of the parks division was taking place with the reopening. I was like, ooh, what is? I'm sure all these things are going to be reevaluated, and the fact that they kind of stuck to it and said, no, wait, listen, to Jay's point, it doesn't move the needle. It's an operational hassle. It takes money. It's all these kind of things, but it's essential to the story, right? And I thought right there that was symbolic of that kind of mindset. To Jay's point, of hey, we're going to put. That has a valuation too, and I thought that was really important that they maintained that. And yeah, to your point, OG, about these kind of juxtapositions. The one that everybody points to is the castle at the end of Main Street. Doesn't make any sense, but that juxtaposition works, and I think some of those juxtapositions work better than others. So yeah. I do agree with you. I wouldn't have been too upset had it gone back there, but it is like, hey, what story were we trying to tell? Is this consistent with it? And they made the executive decision at great expense to keep it out. Right. That has to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right, we're gonna pivot. We're gonna go to Disney Plus. So in the last quarter, Disney Plus kind of had a banger quarter. I mean, it grew 7.9 subscribers. Okay, now keep that in perspective. Wall Street was predicting like was predicting like 4.5, maybe 5 million. So they kind of like almost doubled what the expectation on Wall Street was. And look, there was a lot of worry leading up to that Q2 report that that Disney was going to maybe even fall under that, because Netflix had like the worst quarter ever. You know, I think like 200,000 subs last quarter. And they're
predicting millions more to fall off as well.
Right. And so a lot of Wall Street was like, oh man, this might be indicative of like what we're going to see with D plus. And it really wasn't. And even to be fair, even Paramount Plus didn't see a drop off like that. Even Paramount Plus, like a week or so ago, had some pretty solid gains in their streaming platform. So it really does feel like the Netflix issues are really Netflix issues. But Jay, what are your overall thoughts on this Disney Plus news that it grew just about 8 million subs in the last quarter? Where are you at with this?
It's pretty interesting. I'm wondering where this is all going to shake out, because generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that content is king when it comes to these channels, if you will, these streaming services. Yeah. Do you have things that I want to go watch? And if you do, I'm subscribed. If you don't, I'm out. And it's weird because my wife and I have been cable cutters for like the longest period of time. Like I don't even know how many years it's been since we decided we're only going with streaming services. We don't even have an antenna. Like we only do streaming services, right? Like that's it. And right now we have Netflix, we have Amazon Prime, which has many other benefits besides just their content. Yeah. We have got Disney Plus, and we have HBO Max. And if you look back into like paying extra for subscriptions, I mean, HBO has been around for decades as an extra paid service that you paid for premium on top of whatever your cable bill was. And I think the reason why they've maintained that so well is because they've always got the content. I'm always about to cancel my HBO Max, and then I go, "Oh, that's coming out. I gotta stick around for that, right?" And I think Netflix was trying to do something where the Netflix business model essentially has been broken by all these other streaming services, and that was they were trying to be the aggregator. But OG, you let off the conversation by saying, or I think it was you. It could have been fresh baked actually, yeah. But one of you guys said you can't find Disney stuff anywhere else anymore. They're canceling all their contracts, right? So you can't get our IP. You got to come to our channel. And Disney's by far in the best place with the IP it owns and the catalog of stuff to say you can only get our stuff here. The only other competitor that I think's there already is HBO Max. We'll see where everybody else shows up with that. But like for me personally, I keep seeing shows on Paramount Plus that I would love to watch. But I'm like, I don't want to pick up another. I mean, how many more subscription services before I'm basically paying for cable, right? So we're playing this game, and I think that Disney will win so long as Disney understands why people are showing up for its content and feeding that content back to them and not getting hung up on some of that stuff. But I would say that they're one of the best situated players with their depth of catalog. I mean, I'm paying a Disney Plus subscription, and I don't have to go back to the vault to get my Peter Pan release. I can go watch it when I want to watch it, right? Like, so I think that they're very well suited to be competitive in this space. But I think it's ultimately going to probably come down to content.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jay, about like HBO, like Warner being like the number 2, like the close second, because I would agree with you. Like, they're serious competition. I mean, they have some pretty legendary IP. And look, unfortunately, Warner has been really mismanaged. I would say really since AOL bought them in the early 2000s, you know. Mm-hmm. But they have stuff. I mean, they got Superman, like literally like the most iconic superhero ever. I mean, this is like the Mickey Mouse of superheroes. I mean, you can't get more iconic than Superman. They got Batman, which is a huge cash cow. They got the Looney Tunes, man, and they've been vastly underutilized for decades. But the Looney Tunes are big business. That's like a Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy kind of situation. If they can do that right, there's a lot of money to be made there, you know. So we'll see how this new CEO Zaslav does and everything. But Warner Brothers is really a sleeping giant. I mean, they could really give Disney some really huge competition if they start to manage their, like you said, Jay, like, the content is king. If Warner can really utilize their content better, their IP better, oh man, Disney will be shaking in their boots. I'm telling you that they have some really hard hitting IP in that studio for sure. For sure. What do you think, Dre? Overall, D+, 7.9 mil subs.
This is. I think we're entering phase 2 of the streaming war, and to Jay's point, I think he touched on it, right. Not everybody is going to have 50 streaming services,
right?
And the streaming services themselves know that. They know that they're only going to be like maybe 2 or 3 real big players left, honestly. And it's like, who's the final 3 going to be? And Disney was expressly positioning itself to be one of those final 3. I think Netflix's problem, yes, content is king, but you have to have content that people want to watch. And if you're out of step with what the viewer wants to watch, that could be a dangerous area. I think they had a very wide swath of content, a diverse set of content, but not a lot of there wasn't a variety of storytellers. Unfortunately, they all kind of were, leaning their stories in one direction and weren't maybe appealing to the broadest audience that they possibly could, and burning through billions of dollars worth of venture capital to do it. And you knew that was all gonna come crashing down if those subscriber numbers ever dipped off because of the amount of venture capital they were burning through. Right. And now you're seeing the stock price plummet, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it was all kind of built on a house of cards per se, right? And that all kind of came crashing down, unfortunately. I think Disney is well positioned with their IP to actually do that. I think they have the IP that people want to see. Ain't no question about it. No question. And we'll get into maybe some pipeline issues in a second, but I think they do have the content that people want to see for right now. I think Disney needs to kind of be in lockstep with what people want to see, how they want to see it, and so forth. And I think they will be successful ultimately in the end, and not suffer the same fate as Netflix. So it's going to be fascinating to see. 7.9, like you said, OG. I mean, that's pretty good. In all honesty, now I know a lot of that's kind of spread out amongst a lot of different markets. Yeah. But they are definitely positioning themselves to be one of those final 3. Without question. Will they be able to leverage that into a kind of a revenue generating enterprise rather than the revenue suck that it is now? That's a big question, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I think that Disney really needs to get over is this idea that like the Marvel shows and the Star Wars shows can't like overlap. Yeah, they got to start churning stuff out. And if you have a Marvel and a Star Wars show premiering in the same time period, then so be it. They got to get over that. You got to start churning this stuff out, and that those are the big drivers for Disney Plus are those 2 IPs, and you can't. They can't be too super concerned about that. I don't know. What do you think, Jay, about that? Like we've seen like a real dedicated effort by Disney to sort of like, okay, now there's Moon Knight. Now we're going to wait a few weeks, and now there's Kenobi. Do you think they should just kind of give up on that and just kind of like start dropping content and start really kind of like flooding the streaming service and getting these subs in there and not be so preoccupied with that? Or is it necessary?
It's a really good question. So, but honestly, I think I agree with you. And I say that because even as a person who, I'm podcasting weekly about Moon Knight, I will be podcasting weekly about Kenobi. It's like these are things that I'm actively involved in making sure I watch the show and don't get spoiled and all of that kind of stuff. But I do think that, when we have off weeks, I can definitely see like, is kind of like, well, now what am I going to do? Especially if you don't have other services, right? Yeah. Like if you don't have other services and there's not new stuff coming out, it makes it a little bit more difficult because it's going to drive viewership into other channels. And we see this, the social media wars right now are all driven by getting people to keep watching. And so it does make me wonder. It's like, I would not have any problem watching Kenobi and Moon Knight in the same week, 2 episodes in the same week. That's not a big deal for me. I'd totally be excited about that. So yeah, I'm on board. More content, the better.
Well, yeah, and Jay, also you brought up a great point. Like once you start to create that idle time, like in between the big shows, and it's like, oh, now what do I watch? You sort of create the sense of like people can start to be like, oh, well, okay, you know what we'll do? Moon Knight just ended. We'll cancel D+, and then we'll resubscribe when Kenobi starts.
Churn.
But if you start to have those windows shorten or even overlap, people don't really do. Okay, now you go right into Kenobi. Oh, I can't cancel. I gotta watch Kenobi now. So you kind of fix the churn issue a little bit, I think, because when you have those gaps, you kind of incentivize people to be like, well, we don't really need it right now. I mean, we'll just resubscribe when Kenobi comes out.
Right.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Chapek's talked about this. He's talked about this a lot. He wants one big kind of product launch per week, whether that be an episode of a major show or whether that be a movie coming out on D+. He wants one per week, and that takes, the creative pipeline has to get a lot bigger, which is why they're spending $32 billion in that segment in order to get that content pipeline as large as it can be and to actually be able to launch that content out there. And as we know, content pushes subs, which benefits subs and so forth. That's the circle that they've checked for themselves, and that's good. But they have strategies to kind of affect that churn, but Marvel and Lucasfilm alone can't do that. They're going to need some other franchise and IPs to go along with this. They at least can't do that by themselves, right? They need another, other sources of IP to pull from to actually, pull this off. And it's going to be interesting to see, where that comes from and who the big players will actually end up being to get to that one big product launch per week. It's going to be kind of fascinating. But I agree with you. If some of these things overlap, fine, but I think they want to avoid that because they just don't have that content right now. One of their ways of affecting that churn is actually through the bundle, which is interesting. We learned that on the quarterly earnings call that if you're subscribed to the bulk of services, ESPN Plus and Hulu and stuff like that, and you spread the content out amongst those and their delivery cycles and so forth, you can kind of affect that churn. But for Disney Plus itself, I do agree with you that they gotta get going on this. And they are, but it's slow rolling. They need to step up the schedule here for sure.
100%. Now, Jay, you made a great video about. Let's dive a little bit into Star Wars, a little Kenobi. You made a great video about whether or not you were worried about Kenobi.
Oh yeah.
You kind of like express your thoughts right now in regards to Kenobi. What are your concerns? What like going forward into this? We're only a few weeks out now from the show premiering. Where are you at with this show?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, every time I see a Kenobi trailer, I get super excited about it, right? Because and I will say that if you were to categorize me, and this is one of the problems that I think that Disney has on their hands, and it's a really challenging problem to overcome. I will say that too, is that you literally have 3 different generations of fandom. Right. You've got the original trilogy fans. They want Star Wars to be one thing. You've got the prequel trilogy fans. They want Star Wars to be another thing. And then now you even have the sequel trilogy fans, and they want Star Wars to be a completely different thing. So it's challenging because I'm an original. I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in the early 80s. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up with Star Wars, right? Like this is my jam. And it's hard because I love seeing Kenobi on screen, but I'm the thing that worries me about where Disney is at, especially with its Lucasfilm properties, is that we can't seem to break away from this Skywalker era. Yeah. We got to keep. I mean, even Mandalorian is my favorite Star Wars of all time, by the way. So they appeased an original trilogy Star Wars fan with the best thing I've ever seen in Star Wars was Mandalorian. But even at the end of season 2, they couldn't help but bring in some Skywalker. They had to just bring in some, and I think that like I would just like to see Disney or Lucasfilm specifically realize that they have the IP itself is so powerful that they can introduce new characters into that IP in completely different eras that don't touch other aspects of the universe that we've already seen thus far. And they can, I mean, even Game of Thrones, right? Even Game of Thrones is basically saying like the new show that's going to come out doesn't have any of the same. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 characters that are similar, but it's pretty much a different era of Game of Thrones that we're going to deal with this new show. Yeah. And they're doing that on their 2nd series. So I wish that Disney would just kind of break out of that and say, we want to just take Star Wars in this direction. We're not really trying to get the thinking out of your head that I need to appease sequel trilogy, prequel trilogy, or original trilogy, and just say we're wiping the slate clean. It's actually this now. That's kind of what I hope. And so when I see this, and when I see that you are tugging at my heartstrings a little bit because Kenobi's got his binoculars and he's looking down and there's Luke Skywalker. It's like you couldn't even refrain from using Luke Skywalker in the trailer. Like, of course you're going to get me to watch it, but at the same time, like, I don't want to see Luke in every single property that you do from here to eternity. Like, that's just going to get old, you know? So that's kind of my take.
No, 100%. You don't want to keep going back to that well and kind of overdoing it. And even I would even say the same goes for Darth Vader. You don't want to keep going back to that character over and over. As much as we all love Vader, you can play that out pretty fast, you know? Yes. It's a risk. Look, I understand, like, from a business perspective, I understand Lucasfilm. Oh, if we have Kenobi and Hayden Christensen and they're back together, that's big money, right? And that's good. Okay, great. From a business perspective, that works. But it's also a huge risk because once you start incorporating these legacy characters, we've seen it with the sequel trilogy. A lot of fans were upset with how they handled the legacy characters in the sequel trilogy. Once you start incorporating these legacy characters like Kenobi and Vader and Luke, Disney really opens themselves up to drama because people have like this stuff is like wrapped in people's childhoods. And if you do something that's not in line with how someone perceives it or how it should be, you know, how they perceive it should be, you're going to have a lot of backlash. And Jay, you brought up a great point. Maybe the best way to go about that is to sort of just break away from all that. You know, Star Wars is a cool concept. The lightsabers, the Jedi, the Sith, it's like it's politics, it's religion, all kind of wrapped into this thing. You can make an interesting, cool, original storyline that doesn't have to center around these legacy characters and create all that possible backlash and rift. You know, great point, Jay. Great point. What do you think, Mr. Freshly Squeezed?
Y'all are, as Padme would say, you're hurting my heart. Right? Because Star Wars has done this before with the EU. The EU spanned thousands and thousands and thousands of generations. I mean, my favorite era of Star Wars was the Knights of the Old Republic era. The Old Republic era was like the best.
Yes.
And there's so many different stories that play out there with the Mandalorians and the Jedi and the kind of the Sith at that time period and stuff like that before the Great Purge and stuff. It's great stuff. And as a big Star Wars fan, I could pull like a billion different storylines. My issue with how Lucasfilm is run right now is, I think it's two things. One, I don't think they have, in my experience, I think they just don't have people at the top that are like knowledgeable of the universe like we are and understand where they can pull some of this reference material from and what directions they could go. And also, too, I think, I mean, there's a lot of mismanagement with that kind of stuff as well. How many different series and different movies have we heard about? We're just like, we're still waiting on those. like where are those going to be? And they fall off or something happens, production dramas and whatever. At the same time, I think the storytellers themselves, I mean, I don't know. I don't sense the ambition there. I don't sense the kind of desire to go in those different places like you would think, because I think there is a lot of rich heritage and rich history that you can kind of pull from and kind of redo with this new timeline that they've constructed for themselves. But I just don't see a lot of that ambition. I don't see a lot of knowledge about that kind of stuff. I always bring this up. You ask Kathleen Kennedy a question about any of this stuff, she gives you a very generic answer. You ask Kevin Feige about this stuff, he will give you all these different how the questions interrelated with this story, with that story, and how we want to go here, and that's a great comic book and all that kind of stuff. He has very intimate knowledge of those things. Right. Do you think, Jay, I'm going to ask you because you are the story guy,
Yeah.
Do you think, Lucasfilm has those people, I mean, that can do that properly, that can carry that?
That's a really
kind of
good question. Well, here's the thing. You brought up Kathleen Kennedy, and actually, I think one of the best people to compare Chapek to is Kathleen Kennedy. And this is why I say that. Kathleen Kennedy takes a lot of heat. I dare anybody to go look at Kathleen Kennedy's resume and not tell me it's one of the best resumes in Hollywood. Her resume is outstanding. So what's the problem there? She doesn't have a Kevin Feige. You said it, Dre. She doesn't have a Kevin Feige. So that's Kathleen Kennedy was never supposed to be Kevin Feige. Kathleen Kennedy's the resource person. She's the money person. She's the one saying, like, let's greenlight this, let's greenlight that, let's get this person involved. But what she does need is she needs a Kevin Feige. She needs somebody to oversee this whole world that
creative
Lucasfilm
visionary, you mean?
out. Exactly, a creative visionary that understands what's. I mean, I'm with you because Knights of the Old Republic, KOTOR 2, fantastic stuff, man. I love it. And so I think what we're missing is now Lucasfilm does have a story group. But you'll notice that the way that the Lucasfilm Story Group is run is that they're active in areas where it's probably detrimental for storytellers to be active. And I think they've pulled off that a little bit, but a lot of their storytellers were on Twitter and engaging with fans and offering their opinion on what the latest thing was and why that thing was there and all this kind of stuff. And I think that that's kind of the wrong way to address that. I think you've got to have somebody like a Kevin Feige who's like, look, we're going to hit some rocky areas, but this is the path we're going down. And we're not going to worry about what Twitter says there's going to be some misses. There's going to be some hits. As long as there's more hits than misses, we keep getting to tell stories. And I think that's kind of where Lucasfilm needs to go because they seem like even take the sequel trilogy. J.J. Abrams comes in. This is what Star Wars is. Rian Johnson comes in. No, Star Wars is this thing. I can make an argument that both those films on their own are very good films.
Yeah.
You put them in the context of a trilogy, they make zero sense together, right?
Yeah.
So then you bring J.J. Abrams back in, and J.J. Abrams goes, well, you left me with this, Rian Johnson. I wasn't expecting to come back into this world. Now, what do I have the ability to actually pull off? I have no villain. So I either make Kylo go full dark side, full Vader, full Emperor, or I try and redeem Kylo. But if I redeem Kylo, I got to bring somebody else. I need another villain. I got to get somebody back as a villain. I can't use Snoke's off the table, and there's no way I can use the leader of the First Order. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. The red-haired guy,
General Hux.
General Hux. You're not getting away with Hux, right? Like he's not going to be the mastermind of everything. And so what does he do? What do you do?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll bring back the Emperor. I mean, this is the fact that nobody's looking at this story holistically and going, where are we going with this? Where's the end of this road? Where are we trying to get to?
And I agree with you because I talk about this all the time. Like, Marvel, they have a direction. They know where they're going. They know where they're going for the next 40 years. It seems like Lucasfilm is really tied up in if with the trilogy, they didn't quite know where they were going to go or how to get there. And they kind of found along the way. And that's where you get this kind of it's all over the place, right? But with the overall Star Wars, I just think it's like a lot of plot filling, and I think the story group does this a lot too, where it's like, oh, let's create a reason why this exists and why this doesn't exist and what happened here and all that kind of stuff. And it's not really like there's not direction. We're not going on a linear timeline, obviously, but it's like where are we going from here? Where is Lucasfilm attempting to be in 5 to 10 years? I have no idea. Marvel, I have a very good idea of kind of where that whole thing is going. Right. For Lucasfilm, I mean, it's clueless, and it has been clueless ever since they were purchased. I mean, let's be honest. It's a lot of story gap things where it's like, hey, let's tell this gap between this timeline. Even with Obi-Wan, right? It tells the story of Obi-Wan between here and here. It's like, well, that's great. Marvel does that kind of stuff too, but that's not the kind of the focus of their whole business. Their whole business is we're moving forward, moving down the line here, and there's momentum towards that direction. I just don't see that that same thing at Lucasfilm, and it frustrates me because Star Wars has an untapped well of potential. It's just sitting there, but they just don't want to tap it.
Well, and just really quick, just 2 things really quick. One, if Lucasfilm wants to hire me to be part of their story group, I'm in. Give me a seat, I'm down. But here's what I think, and this is not a criticism of the individuals in the story group, by the way. Right. This is a criticism of the overarching structure of how it's managed.
100%.
They almost seem to function as librarians as opposed to visionaries of where we're going. And so a librarian says, this is what's come before. And then to your point, Dre, this is where you can slot things in, because we kind of could use an explanation for this, create a show. We could kind of use an explanation for this, create a movie. And I think what Kevin Feige is he's not the librarian. He's the visionary. He's the Steve Jobs of that world, right? Yeah. And I think that if we got somebody like, and then by the way, they've got that person. They just need to formalize it, because Jon Favreau is amazing at this, and with Dave Filoni at his side, we got perfection there. So like, let's do that, you know?
Yeah.
So anyways,
the fact that they haven't done that before is like, it's ridiculous. But go ahead, OG. Sorry.
It's crazy. No, and Jay, you bring up a fantastic point when you compared Feige to like Steve Jobs, and a lot of that comes in with the fact of like being a visionary and like taking risks, right? And like being able to like, hey, you know what? Creatively, this works best. It's a ballsy move, but we're gonna do it because that's what works for the story. It's like the sequel trilogy is a perfect example of like Lucasfilm really playing it safe. They ended that whole trilogy very, very safe. I was telling Dre, I think it was just yesterday, right, Dre? Like Rey as a character would be so much more interesting. I mean, look, she's a granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. Let her go full dark side. You saw her kind of struggling with it through the trilogy. Let her end the trilogy full badass Empress Palpatine, full dark side Sith, and then you can redeem Ben Solo, right? And then you can have him kind of. So they both kind of went like kind of opposite poetry. It rhymes, you know, the whole thing. It would have been a much more interesting character, I think, for her arc, you know, who started off very good, ended very bad. Kylo started off very bad, ended very good. I think that makes for a really cool, interesting storyline. But instead, they went the very safe route. You know, we're going to go Rey Skywalker. We're going to do, you know, and just like, and that's okay. But it felt very reactionary. It felt very safe. I think that like Kevin Feige would have taken it in a whole new direction. You know, we're seeing him doing that kind of with Scarlet Witch, like taking her in a crazy direction. Like fans love Wanda Maximoff, right? And he's not afraid though to take that character in really new, interesting directions. And I just wish Lucasfilm would kind of take that same kind of ballsy approach, and they just don't. They play it safe so much. It's sad.
Part of the reason why I think that is because I just don't think the people at the top, is what I said before, they just don't have a good grasp of Star Wars. At least the decision makers don't, right? You know, that's why I agree with you. Set Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni up as the decision makers, you're going to get a lot of good content real fast, right? But they just, because you don't have that grasp, though, that hinders your ability to take risks. It hinders your ability to feel like, okay, hey, we're going to zig and zag here, but we know kind of where we're going kind of thing. Kevin Feige can do that because Scarlet Witch, I mean, you know, he has a very good knowledge of this current iteration of Scarlet Witch. He knows what fans kind of want to see, and also kind of like where that character has gone in the comic books, right? To understand like, hey, this story has worked. Let's go ahead and set it up here with this character, but understanding like where our audience kind of wants this character to be, what they're expecting, and maybe what they're not expecting, but what they will to accept, right? Star Wars, I just don't see that operation fleshed out. I just don't see the pieces in place to do that, and that is really unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We all love this franchise dearly, and I think that eventually it'll get on its feet. Hopefully Kenobi kind of starts that whole process. Cautiously optimistic. We'll see. We'll see. You know. I'm very much the eternal optimist. I do like to go into these things, you know, with an optimistic point of view and give it a chance. I love Deborah Chow, but there are things that concern me about this show, and we'll kind of see how that all pans out when it premieres. Yeah.
Now, I believe that the next topic on the docket here deals with this kind of whole thing. Do we believe that, you know, Lucasfilm, as opposed to Marvel, has the pipeline in place to actually facilitate the growth of Disney Plus? Right. Jay, I thought that was a great question. It really got me thinking a lot about that, because man, I'm not sure. OG, how do you feel about the two?
Does Marvel and Lucasfilm have what it takes to kind of feed Disney Plus going forward? Yeah. If done right, absolutely. I mean, these are these two brands are really fueling this platform. I mean, Baby Yoda, this guy right here. I mean, they wouldn't be at the sub count they're at right now without this guy, right? So if you do it right, it can be a huge driver for Disney Plus. You know, Marvel kind of has their shit together. I kind of have faith in Feige. I mean, I look, everything they do isn't perfect. I mean, there's things I don't like and there's things I love, right? But for the most part, Marvel has their stuff together. I have faith that they can be a real big driver for D Plus. Like we talked about a minute ago with like Lucasfilm, it's a little more hit and miss, a little more, you know, Book of Boba Fett was okay. A little weird show, but it was okay. Lucasfilm, if they can just get their act together and really start to hit home runs. When they hit those home runs, though, I'm telling you, it's to the moon. I mean, it's unstoppable. They just have to get it right. And we've seen it when they got it right with Mando and Grogu. They just kind of have to recapture that magic more consistently. And I think if they can do that, I think that they're going to be, I think there's enough there to feed Disney Plus. But what do you think, Jay, in terms of this?
This is interesting because I've been listening to people's responses to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and Moon Knight, and then I've been listening to people talk about Kenobi coming up and Book of Boba Fett, obviously. And this is what I see kind of happening in the marketplace a little bit, is that it's starting to get more and more fractured, right? And this is in part I think a bigger problem in that Disney specifically started to play the. Now, this is a card that's been played over the course of decades before, but Disney started to play this card pretty hard. Was the sort of I'm marketing to you based on your identity card. Are you a prequels fan? I'm marketing to you because you're a prequels fan. Are you an original trilogy fan? I'm marketing to you because you're an original trilogy fan. Do you lean on the right side of the left side of the fence politically? I'm marketing to you as somebody who leans over on that side of the fence. And now I'm starting to see some real fractured kind of overtones or undertones, I should say, in some of the fan bases. A lot of it's really toxic, and like I don't suggest you dive down that rabbit hole because that's not a place you want to end up. But what I'm seeing like, well, that's not my identity, so I'm out. Right? It's sort of like this left turn. And one of the things that Kevin Feige does that I hope that the Lucasfilm crew will do better in the future is that, and because I don't think Chapek is he's a numbers guy, he's a business guy. I don't think he's leaning into any of the identities. So maybe he'll start to like, this will start to ease off from here. And not that you shouldn't do that, but it just has implications. Once you choose a target market, that's your target market. And if you're not in that target market, you're excluded. Just like we feel as pass holders, it's like, oh, I'm maybe not the target market anymore. But anyways, my point being with Feige has this really unique ability to take very obscure things that he's pulling from the comics and make them accessible to the general market.
Yeah,
and that's very difficult to do because I can't go super deep with people on their comics knowledge, right? I was a Star Wars EU guy, so I was into that, but I can't go super deep into the Marvel comics. But when I've put my toe in that water, I'm like, this is bonkers, dude. Like this is like off the charts. I don't even know if I can understand what's going on. And then you see what Feige does. I mean, just to give you everybody like that listening a kind of a taste. The Infinity Gauntlet series, which is what Infinity War and Endgame and that whole phase was based off of, is about Thanos trying to win over the love of a female character representative of death. Like that's why he's acting like a teenager, like a lovesick teenager, is why he has the Infinity Gauntlet. And then Feige goes, no, that won't play with the general market. Like that's a super comics fan thing, but we got to make it look different over here. And I feel like maybe on the Lucasfilm side, since they don't have the EU to pull from, I'm wondering if it's kind of like, well, now what do we pull from? Now we can only fill the gaps in what we already have because we're not pulling from anything else. There's nothing else that we have confidence in. So I don't know. I think for me, Marvel's in a transition phase. That I think that they will overcome that transition phase, but the transition phase itself hasn't been super, super smooth. Black Widow was kind of okay. Shang-Chi, some people like that a lot. I thought that was basically kind of okay. People did not like Eternals, even though I kind of thought Eternals was okay. Doctor Strange is somewhat kind of balanced. So I think what we're seeing is Marvel trying to get past look, we can't keep using these same actors. We can't keep using these same characters. We need to move past that. Once Marvel gets past that, I think they're good to go.
Yeah.
On the Lucasfilm side, I don't think they're good to go until they figure out structurally how they want to address the visionary problems that we've been talking about.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is just like, you don't, it takes an intimate knowledge of these things to kind of know, like what to pull from, right? And I will say this. I mean, some people have said that, and to echo your point about not being able to pull from, like, they don't have the repository of things to pull from, right? But we've seen them pull from stuff a little bit.
That's true.
So it's like, yeah, okay, so that's not canon anymore. But the Marvel comics really aren't canon for the MCU, right? We can kind of pull and kind of, do some stuff where it's like, hey, that story worked. It just needs some redressing with our universe, right? It needs some maybe more accessibility for the audience, but that works. But that really comes down to people who kind of knew that and kind of understood what did work and what didn't work and what would work and what wouldn't work, right? And part of that too is like, you got to be in tune with your audience a little bit here. Now I understand it's a much different story than Marvel, right? Marvel's not disparate between, all these different factions and groups. But you saw that they did do that successfully with Mando. So we do know that we can kind of bring people together and kind of recognize, hey, you like the prequels for this, we're going to have a little bit of that. You like the sequel or the original trilogy for some kind of aspects, we're going to bring that in. We're going to be consistent with the sequel trilogy and so forth, right? We're going to do these things that can appeal to the largest demo of Star Wars fans and bring you a story that you may that may harken back to some of those other storylines, but it's kind of its own thing. You need more of that, and I just don't see the pieces in play. Like you said, Jay, I just don't see the pieces in play to actually pull it off at scale. It works like, from kind of a series to series thing. Let's be honest, Boba Fett wasn't, quite in line with that, but it was kind of close, right? It got close in some places. You just, I think you need some people in some creative positions that can kind of do that and do that effectively. That's not an easy thing to overcome. I'm not saying that it is, but I'm saying that is what they need to do in order to have the kind of the same content pipeline that Marvel does. And they haven't done that, and this goes back to when Lucasfilm was bought by Disney, right? I think the Disney executives and what they imagined was it was a turnkey operation, just like Pixar, just like Marvel. Right. And when it came to Lucasfilm, it was not. They hadn't produced a film in 10 years. They hadn't really produced content on a big scale in a long, long time. And they wanted to put out a film a year, and that wasn't the right strategy. You really need to get the foundation built, which they failed to do, and that would have that would have overcome a lot of these issues that we're seeing right now. But unfortunately, they didn't, and we're kind of living with those. So they still got to work on that foundation. That's what I'm saying.
They do. And Kevin Feige's a real special guy, and I mean that like seriously. Like he really is unique in so many ways. Like there was a kind of like a promotional video from D23. I think it was like back in September, I believe, promoting the Walt Disney Archive kind of documentary on Disney Plus, right? Mm-hmm. And you can check it out on YouTube. I might even link it down below. But they were asking like the various studio heads, like, what are your favorite things in the Walt Disney Archives, right? And like a lot of these studio executives kind of gave like kind of standard answers that really wouldn't shock you, right? But Feige, though, man, he kind of blew me away. They asked him, and he's like, "Oh well, Walt's original phone that was on his desk, and the John Hench like matte paintings and anything Mary Poppins." I'm like, Mary Poppins, right? He's talking about his love for right? And he's talking about his love for like animatronics and things like that. And I'm like, wow, Feige just took it in such a nerd direction. Like this is a guy who runs the MCU. Comic book stuff, talking about his love for Mary Poppins. I mean, how gangster can you get? I love this guy, man. He's a total nerd. He's great. I really, really do love Kevin Feige. He is really special. That's why I think it's very hard. I see Zaslav over at Warner Brothers. There's been a lot of talk about he's trying to find another Kevin Feige to run DC, and
Good luck.
Lucasfilm is trying to find. Well, Lucasfilm needs a Kevin Feige running that studio, and it's just hard to find. Kevin Feige is really a unique sort of situation. He really is that unicorn, I think.
And I've heard that Jon Favreau has a lot of that kind of deep inside baseball type knowledge of Disney, right? It's sort of similar to Kevin Feige, right? But then you got Dave Filoni over here who has just an unbelievable knowledge of the universe. I mean, and even actors and stuff that are working on these projects, it's like I can go to Dave Filoni at any time. He can tell me exactly where this blaster came from, like the history of it, how it got in your hands, all that kind of stuff. It's insane, right? He's like this walking encyclopedia. Well, there you go. That's your Kevin Feige. It's the two of them in this case, but that's who it is. Like Kevin Feige is a irreplaceable figure. I mean, and Warner Brothers, they tried to find a Kevin Feige figure and couldn't do it. They they try to have that kind of architect, and that's not an easy thing to find. But I think they have them. It's Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. You got to put them in those positions and get going right there. If you want to exactly right. If you want to have Kathleen Kennedy still there, sure you can. Making some executive decisions. But honestly, it's really going to come down to some creative visionaries who actually understand what the universe is, what the audience wants, how we can represent it to them, and have a path moving forward. There you go.
100%. Well, hey, Jay, I want to thank you, brother, for coming on today. It was a fantastic time, really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for coming on, talking parks, talking, Marvel, Star Wars, all this stuff, dude. It was a really good time.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I could talk about this with you guys all day long. This is great. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Loved having you on, Jay. If you can kind of remind everybody at home where they can find you on social media, sir.
Yeah, go check out the Story Geeks on YouTube or on your favorite podcast provider. Or if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow Jay Sherer, Sherer, Jay Sherer, or Storytelling HSW. How Stories Work is what that stands for. Storytelling HSW. And I'm always talking about this kind of stuff. I mean, not the Disney stuff as much, but the more Marvel, Lucasfilm stuff all the time. And every time there's a Disney or Pixar film, we talk about those too. And I have a feeling if I can talk them into it, these two guys will be showing up on my channel before you know it. So
whatever you want, we're there.
Yes,
we're there.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Hey, say the word, say the day. We'll be there, Jay, for sure.
Awesome. That sounds great.
For sure. And I will definitely be linking down in the description all of Jay's social media, his Twitter, his YouTube. Subscribe to this man. He's awesome. He's a wealth of information. He makes great content. So subscribe, give him all the love, all the support, please. Down below in the description. And Mr. Vashkai, producer Dre, host of Freshly Squeezed, the man that wears many hats. If you can let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Well, the best place to interact with me is going to be on Twitter. It's right down there, at Vashkai, just like it's spelled right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, Orange Code 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info squeezed fresh right from the Grove. So, there you go, right there, the acknowledgement whistle. Jay, I just wanted to say it was great having you on, brother. I mean, it really, really was. This was a fantastic conversation. You know your stuff. You can hang, and it was very rewarding to have you. As part of this, it was rewarding for me to take part in it. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming on. It was
again,
really,
my
really
pleasure.
fun.
My pleasure. All kinds of fun.
Absolutely. And look out for that video for the OG 55 crew coming on Jay's channel.
Yeah. I'll do my OG motion here. Yeah.
That's it.
Yes. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching today. This was a really good time. Comment down below with all your opinions on Chapek, the parks, Lucasfilm, Marvel, Kevin Feige, Favreau, all that. We dove into a ton of stuff. Comment down below. We'd love to hear from you guys. And as always, just have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.